My wife said on a quiet evening in Vancouver. Maybe our story is meant to evolve into something different. I accepted the moment without resistance, transitioned into a leadership role abroad, and eventually she heard about the changes through mutual friends. Maybe our story is meant to evolve into something different. She said it so quietly that I almost missed it under the sound of the rain hitting the window. But I didn't miss it. I heard every single syllable of it. And somehow, in the silence that followed, I understood that this wasn't a question. It wasn't an opening to a conversation. It was a conclusion she had already reached on her own. We were sitting in our apartment in Vancouver, the one we'd picked together 3 years ago because of the view of the mountains in the distance. She had her knees pulled to her chest on the far end of the couch. I had my coffee going cold in my hand. The lamp in the corner threw just enough light to see her face, and her face told me everything she wasn't saying out loud. She wasn't angry. She wasn't crying. She looked like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had finally decided to set it down. Right there, in front of me. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. I'm 34. She's 32. We'd been married for 4 years, together for 6. There's no dramatic incident I can point to. No affair, no explosion, no single moment where everything broke apart at once. It was something slower than that. Something that happens in the spaces between words, in the pauses between plans, in the way two people can share a bed every night and still somehow drift so far from each other that one evening one of them says something like that, and the other one just sits there holding cold coffee, understanding exactly what it means. I asked her what she meant, not because I didn't understand, but because some part of me still wanted to hear her say it plainly. She looked at me for a long moment before she spoke. I think we've been trying to hold on to something that stopped being real a long time ago, she said. I don't think either of us has been fully happy. I think we both know that. She was right. I didn't know that. I just hadn't let myself sit with it. Her name was Claire. We had met at a conference in Toronto 6 years ago, 2 people from different cities who ended up at the same round table during a lunch break and talked for 3 hours straight. I remember thinking that she was the most direct person I had ever met. She had no interest in small talk. She asked real questions. She listened to the answers. She moved to Vancouver 6 months after that conference, partly for a job, partly because we both decided it was worth trying something serious. And for a while, it was serious. For a while, it was everything. But marriages don't fall apart in one night. They dissolve slowly, like something left in water too long. The first signs were small. Conversations that used to last for hours started ending sooner and sooner. Vacations we planned but didn't book. Plans for the future that we kept pushing forward without ever explaining why. I worked long hours. She worked long hours. We told ourselves that was just how things were for people in their 30s trying to build something. We told ourselves we'd have more time later. Later always stayed later. I had been passed over for a senior position at my company twice in 2 years. The second time was harder than the first. Not just because of the professional disappointment, but because I realized I had been waiting for that promotion to feel like my life had properly started. Like it would validate something I had been quietly doubting about myself for a long time. Claire knew about both times. The first time, she was sympathetic. The second time, she was quieter. Not cold, but quieter. Like she didn't know what to say that she hadn't already said. Like maybe she was tired of waiting for something to shift too. That evening on the couch, I didn't argue with her. I didn't get defensive. I didn't do the thing I had done in smaller disagreements before, where I'd explain my position until the conversation turned into a negotiation. I just sat there, and I listened. And when she finished speaking, I said, "I hear you." She looked at me like she was waiting for more. But I didn't have more. Not right then. She nodded slowly, uncurled from the couch, and went to the bedroom. I stayed where I was until my coffee was completely cold and the rain had stopped and the apartment was very, very quiet. We didn't fight about it. That surprised both of us, I think. There were conversations over the next 2 weeks. Careful conversations. The kind where 2 adults who genuinely respect each other try to find language for something that doesn't have clean language. She said she still cared about me. I believed her. I said I still cared about her. She believed me. But caring about someone and being the right person for them are 2 different things. We had learned that the slow way. She brought up counseling once. I said I was open to it. She thought about it for a few days and then said that she didn't think it would change the fundamental thing. I asked her what the fundamental thing was. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think we both want different versions of our lives. And I don't think either version is wrong. They just don't fit together the way we thought they would. I sat with that for a long time. The decision to separate didn't come in one conversation. It came in several, spread across almost a month. By the time we had formally acknowledged it, there was almost a sense of relief in the apartment, which was its own kind of heartbreak. Relief shouldn't be the feeling that accompanies the end of a marriage, but sometimes it is, and pretending otherwise doesn't help anyone. I called my older brother, Conrad, the night it became real. He lives in Calgary and has always been the person I call when I don't know what to do. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't give me a speech. He just said, "I'm sorry." And then he said, "What do you need right now?" I told him I didn't know. He said, "That's okay. You don't have to know yet." I appreciated that more than I could tell him in that moment. The logistics of the separation were handled with the kind of quiet, organized sadness that I imagine most adult separations involve. We had a shared lease, shared accounts, shared furniture, shared routines. Unwinding that took time. It took patience. It took moments of unexpected grief when one of us came across something small, a mug, a book, a photograph, and had to decide what to do with it. We divided things without drama. We were both reasonable. We were both heartbroken. Those two things coexisted. 2 months after that evening on the couch, I was living in a short-term furnished apartment in the same neighborhood. I had walked past our old building twice that first week before I realized I needed to change my route. Not because I was bitter, but because I was still in the process of learning where I ended and where the life we had built together began. That takes longer than 2 months. That takes much longer. It was during those first weeks alone that something shifted inside me. Not dramatically, not all at once, but I noticed it. I was sitting at my kitchen table at 6 in the morning with a legal pad in front of me, and I started writing down every professional opportunity one had avoided, delayed, or talked myself out of over the past 3 years. The list was longer than I expected. Every item had a reason attached to it. Stability, timing, waiting for the right moment, waiting for confirmation that I was ready. I looked at that list for a long time. Then I turned the page over and started a different list. There was a position I had heard about through a contact in my industry, a regional leadership role based in Singapore, overseeing operations across 4 Southeast Asian markets for a company that had been expanding aggressively and needed experienced people who weren't afraid of ambiguity. I had heard about it months earlier, when I was still married, still trying to make things work, still telling myself that stability meant staying in one place. I had filed it away somewhere in the back of my mind and not thought about it again. Or so I told myself. The truth was I had thought about it many times. I had just kept convincing myself to think about it later. I reached out to my contact, a woman named Nora who worked in operations consulting and had known me professionally for 5 years. She had mentioned the role once, almost in passing, the way people mention things they aren't sure you're ready for. When I emailed her, she responded within 20 minutes. She asked if I was serious this time. I told her I was. She said the timeline was tight, but the role was still open. She said she could make an introduction. I told her to go ahead. The interview process was not fast. There were 4 rounds over 6 weeks. Video calls with Singapore, with their European headquarters, with a team in Kuala Lumpur. There was a written assessment on market strategy that took me an entire weekend. There was a final in-person visit to Singapore, which the company flew me out for, which felt like both a reward and a test. I had not traveled alone for professional reasons in years. I had forgotten how much I liked it. The focus of it. The way a hotel room in a foreign city becomes a kind of clean slate. No history on the walls. No accumulated weight. Just the work and the quiet and the sense that you are exactly where you chose to be. Singapore was extraordinary. I don't use that word loosely. The city operated with a precision that I found both humbling and energizing. The people I met during that visit were sharp, direct, internationally minded in a way that made my previous professional environment feel small by comparison. Not worse, just smaller. I spent 3 days there. I walked along Marina Bay at night after my last dinner meeting and stood at the water and thought about the man I had been 6 months ago, sitting in a Vancouver apartment, holding cold coffee, afraid to move. I didn't feel sorry for that version of myself, but I understood something I hadn't been able to articulate before. The stillness I had mistaken for safety had actually been a kind of slow shrinking. They offered me the role 3 weeks after I returned. The title was Regional Director of Operations. The compensation was significantly better than anything I had been offered in Canada. The scope was unlike anything I had managed before. It was also a city I had never lived in, a team of 43 people I had never met, and a role that would require me to be fully present in a way I wasn't sure I had been fully present at anything in years. I called Conrad. He said, "Take it." I said, "It's a big move." He said, "That's the point." I accepted the offer on a Tuesday morning. I remember exactly where I was standing. In my kitchen, in my temporary apartment, with the same legal pad on the table where I had made that first list months ago. I signed the digital contract, sent it back, and then stood there for a moment not knowing what to do with myself. Then I made more coffee, and I started planning. I told Claire about the move before I told almost anyone else. Not because I owed her that exactly, but because 6 years of your life with someone doesn't disappear the moment you sign separation papers. We were not in contact regularly at that point, but we had been civil, even kind, in the exchanges we had. I sent her a message saying I had something to share and asked if we could speak briefly. She agreed. We got coffee near her office. She looked good, different in some way I couldn't immediately name. She had changed her hair. She seemed less tired than she had in the last year of our marriage. We sat across from each other like two people trying on the newer, stranger version of what they had been to each other. I told her about the Singapore role. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a second. Then she said, "That's a big step." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Is it what you want?" I thought about the question honestly. "I think it's who I want to become," I said. She looked at me for a moment, and I saw something in her face that I hadn't seen in a long time. Not longing, not regret, something more like recognition. Like she was seeing something she had been waiting for without knowing it. "Good," she said quietly, and she meant it. I moved to Singapore 4 months after the separation was finalized. I shipped what mattered, sold what didn't. Conrad came to Vancouver for a weekend to help me close out the apartment. We ordered pizza and sat on the floor of the empty living room and talked until 2 in the morning. He told me about his own life, his kids, his marriage, the particular kind of exhaustion and love that comes from building something real with someone over time. I listened more than I talked. He said, "You'll figure it out." I said, "I know." He said, "No, I mean you actually will. I'm not just saying that. There's a difference." He knew I understood the difference. The first 3 months in Singapore were genuinely difficult. I don't want to romanticize the early part. There is nothing glamorous about sitting alone in a new apartment in a foreign country at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, eating takeout, wondering whether the professional leap you just made was courage or something else entirely. The team was good. The work was demanding in ways that stretched me in directions I hadn't been stretched before. But I was also lonely in a way I hadn't fully prepared for. Not lonely for Claire, specifically. Lonely for familiarity. Lonely for the version of myself that knew where everything was. There was a colleague named Felix who became something like a friend in those early months. He was Belgian, had been with the company for 9 years, had lived in 4 different countries, and had the kind of dry, unhurried humor that makes long workdays survivable. He took me out for dinner in my 3rd week and gave me what I later came to think of as the only expat orientation speech that actually mattered. He said, "The first month you feel like a tourist. The second month you feel like an imposter. The 3rd month you either leave or you decide to actually be here. And once you decide to actually be here, it starts to feel like yours." He was right about the timeline. He was right about everything in that speech. Month 4 was different. Something settled. I don't have a better word for it than that. I started to know my neighborhood. I found a coffee place 3 blocks from my apartment where the owner recognized me and had my order ready before I finished the queue. I understood the rhythms of my team better. I knew which problems needed my direct involvement and which ones didn't. I started running in the mornings, which I hadn't done consistently in years. Not because I was trying to become someone new, but because I had enough space in my life to do it. That, too, was something the marriage had quietly taken from me without either of us noticing. Not by force, just by the steady pressure of 2 people trying to hold a shape that no longer fit. The work expanded. By month 6, I was responsible for a project that involved coordinating with teams in 3 time zones simultaneously and presenting quarterly reviews to the company's European executive team. I had never done anything at that scale before. There were moments in those first reviews where I was acutely aware of how much I didn't know. But there is a particular kind of competence that only comes from being thrown into deep water. And I found it. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but I found it. I made a mistake in my 8th month that almost cost the company a major partnership. A miscommunication that I should have caught. A detail in a vendor contract that I had delegated too casually. An assumption I'd made that turned out to be wrong. The company's COO, a formidable Singaporean woman named Diane who had the most precise mind I had encountered in any professional context, called me into a meeting and went through the error line by line. Not shouting, not in a punishing way, just very precisely, very clearly. When she finished, she said, "I want to know how this happened." I didn't make excuses. I walked her through my thinking at each decision point, including where I had chosen speed over verification. She listened. Then she said, "I'm going to tell you something I don't usually say in a review of an error. The fact that you can walk me through your thinking means there's something to work with. Most people in your seat would have given me 10 minutes of defense. You gave me 10 minutes of honesty. Don't make this mistake again." I didn't. A year into the role, I was asked to expand the team. We went from 43 people to 61 in 8 months. I had to learn how to hire at a different speed and scale than I ever had. I had to learn how to build culture deliberately instead of hoping it would form on its own. I had to learn that leadership at that level is less about your own output and more about creating the conditions for other people to do their best work. I had a lot of conversations with Felix about this. I had a lot of late nights. I drank too much coffee. I eventually got better at sleeping. It was around the 14-month mark that I started to feel, for the first time in a very long time, that I was genuinely aligned with my own life. Not happy in the shallow, frictionless way that doesn't survive contact with real difficulty, but aligned. Like the person doing the work and the person who showed up in the mirror in the morning were finally the same person. I wrote about this in a journal I had started keeping after the move. I didn't write in it every day, but I wrote in it when something happened that felt worth marking. That evening I wrote, "I think I understand now what I was afraid of. I was afraid that if I moved toward what I actually wanted, I would lose what I had. I didn't understand that what I had was already gone." He said he had run into someone who knew Claire, a woman named Brooke who had gone to university with her and apparently still saw her occasionally. He said Brooke had told him that Claire had been asking about me, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that suggested anything other than basic curiosity, but asking, wondering how I was doing, what my life looked like now. Conrad said he had told Brooke to tell Claire that I was doing well. He said it in a tone that implied he had been slightly more enthusiastic than strictly necessary. I told him not to strategically manage my former marriage through a network of indirect contacts. He laughed and said, "Too late." I didn't reach out to Claire. That felt important, not out of coldness, but because whatever she was hearing it through the natural movement of a shared world, and that felt like the right distance. We had each needed to become something different. I had done that on my side. What she was doing on hers was her own story to write. I had no claim on it. But I won't pretend I didn't think about it. About the evening on the couch. About the rain. About what she had said and how she had looked when she said it. I had spent some time, in those first months in Singapore, quietly angry at that memory. Not at her, but at myself. At the version of me who had spent 3 years quietly shrinking and calling it stability. At the version of me who had been so afraid of committing to his own potential that he had let his life calcify around him. That anger was useful for a while. It pushed me forward when I was tired. But eventually, like all useful anger, it softened into something more like understanding. She had been right. Our story had needed to evolve. And it had. Just not in the direction either of us had imagined when we were sitting at that round table in Toronto, talking for 3 hours over a conference lunch. 16 months after my move to Singapore, a development happened at work that changed the scope of what I was doing. The company announced a strategic expansion into the Middle East. Dubai and Riyadh were both being targeted for new offices. The COO, Diane, called me into a meeting and said they were considering me to lead the regional build-out. Not as a permanent relocation, but as a 12-month extension of my current mandate with expanded authority and budget. She said, "I want to know if you're interested before I take it further." I asked her how long I had to think about it. She said 24 hours. I took 22. I called Conrad that night. He said, "You're going to say yes." I said, "I haven't decided yet." He said, "You called me, which means you've decided. You're just making sure I know." He wasn't wrong. I said yes to Diane the next morning. She nodded, like she had expected nothing else, and moved immediately into logistics. That, I had come to appreciate, was how she operated. No celebration, no fanfare, just the work. It was one of the things I had learned from watching her over 16 months. Competence doesn't need an audience. You do the thing, and the results speak. You don't perform your own seriousness. The Middle East build-out was the hardest thing I had done professionally. Not because of any single obstacle, But because of the density of the challenges, regulatory complexity across 2 different countries, cultural context that I had to learn quickly and respectfully, recruitment pipelines that needed to be built from scratch, stakeholder relationships that required a kind of patience and protocol I had not previously had to deploy, I failed at several things in the first 4 months. I also succeeded at several things I hadn't expected to. Felix came to visit me in Dubai during month 7 of the build-out. He had some work in the region and extended his trip by 3 days. We had dinner on a terrace overlooking the city skyline, which is one of those views that makes everything feel slightly fictional. He asked me how I was doing. Not professionally. Actually, I told him I was tired but clear. He said, "That's the best you can be at this stage." We talked about his own life for most of the dinner. He had just gotten engaged. He was going to get married in Belgium the following spring. He asked if I would come. I said I would try. I did go. It was a beautiful wedding. But that comes later. It was during those months in Dubai that I heard through the network again. This time, it was a former colleague from my Vancouver days, a man named Owen who had stayed in touch intermittently and worked in the same industry, different company. He sent me a professional message on LinkedIn about something work-related. At the end of it, almost as a postscript, he wrote, "Saw Claire last week at an event. She mentioned hearing you're doing remarkable work. Said she was proud of you." I read that line several times. Said she was proud of you. I sat with that for a long time. Not because it changed anything. Not because it suggested anything should change. But because it meant something. It meant that the woman who had seen me at my most diminished version, who had sat across from me in quiet heartbreak in that Vancouver apartment, had also heard about the version I became. And she had said she was proud. I thought about the specific word choice. Proud. Not happy for you. Not doing well, I hear. Proud. That word carries something particular. It carries a kind of investment. It carries a knowledge of where something started. You can't be proud of someone without understanding what they had to overcome. She knew where I had started. She knew what I had been when I was standing still. And somehow that made the word more than a polite social phrase. It made it feel like a closing of something. A quiet, dignified acknowledgement. A door not slammed, but gently, finally, shut. I didn't message her. I thought about it. I won't pretend otherwise. There was a version of me that wanted to. The version that still associated her voice with the early years, with Toronto, with the life we had genuinely tried to build. But I had learned something in the past 2 years that I had not previously understood about myself. I had learned that some things become beautiful in the rearview mirror precisely because you don't go back to them. They acquire a kind of dignity in the distance, a shape that they couldn't have while you were still inside them. Going back would not honor that. It would only muddy it. I finished the Middle East build-out 4 weeks ahead of schedule. The Dubai office opened with a team of 22 and immediate client traction. Riyadh followed 3 months later. Diane sent me a single line by email the morning the Riyadh launch was confirmed. It said, "This is what good looks like." That was it. From her, that was enough. When I returned to Singapore after the extension, the company had a different shape than when I had left. They had promoted 2 people from my original team into significant leadership roles. The culture I had worked to build was holding. I sat in my first team meeting back and listened to the caliber of discussion happening around me. People solving problems with confidence and precision. People flagging issues without fear of judgment. People trusting each other enough to disagree productively. I had built this. Not alone. Never alone. But I had helped create the conditions for it. And sitting there watching it operate, I felt something that I recognize now as a particular kind of quiet pride. Not the performance of success. Just the actual thing. Felix's wedding was in May. I flew to Belgium for a long weekend. It was a small wedding in a town outside of Bruges, stone buildings and cobblestone streets, and a kind of unhurried beauty that made me understand why people romanticize Europe. I gave a short speech at the dinner. I told a story about Felix buying me dinner in my 3rd week in Singapore and telling me about the 3-month timeline. I told the room that advice had done more for my professional life than almost anything else. I said that the people who give you the right words at the right time are rare, and you should keep them close. Felix's new wife, a French-Belgian woman named, and who was both sharp and deeply warm, told me afterward that she had heard a lot about me. She said, "Felix says you're one of the rare ones who actually changed." I asked what she meant. She said, "Most people who go through what you went through just become harder. You became something else." I asked her what I had become. She thought about it. She said, "Clearer." I like that. I called Conrad from my hotel in Bruges the night after the wedding. It was late in Belgium. Early morning in Calgary. He picked up immediately, which meant he had been awake. He asked how the wedding was. I told him it was beautiful. He asked how I was. I told him something I had been thinking about for a few days but hadn't said out loud. I told him that I thought I was, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely content. Not satisfied with mediocrity. Not resigned to things being okay. But genuinely, actively content. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It's about time." And there was something in his voice. Something like relief. Like he had been waiting for me to get to this moment for longer than either of us had acknowledged. There's a thing that happens when you rebuild a life from a distance. The physical distance from your previous context removes a particular kind of social gravity. When you're living in the city where your marriage happened, the marriage is everywhere. The coffee shop you used to go to together. The route you used to drive. The friends who knew you as part of a pair and now aren't sure how to recalibrate. All of that functions like a kind of adhesive. It keeps you attached to who you were. When you move far enough away, that gravity weakens. Not because you're running from anything, but because you have enough space to figure out who you actually are when no one is waiting for you to be something familiar. I am writing this now from my apartment in Singapore, which is no longer the spare, temporary feeling place it was when I arrived. It has become mine. There are things on the walls I chose. There is a coffee routine in the morning that I chose. There is a life here that I built, piece by piece, from the ground up. And the foundation of it is different from the foundation of the life I had before. Not because the previous life was bad, but because I was different in the building of this one. I built this life from a place of intention instead of a place of waiting. Mutual friends still mention her occasionally. Not constantly. Not in a way that feels like anyone is trying to tell me anything. Just the natural way that people who share a previous social world continue to be part of each other's peripheral awareness. The last time I heard anything was from Sophie again. She sent a note saying she had seen Claire at a friend's birthday gathering and that she had seemed genuinely happy. She had started something of her own, apparently. A small consulting practice. Something she had been thinking about for years, but had never had the bandwidth to pursue. Sophie said she seemed lighter than she had in a long time. I was glad. I mean that without irony. I was genuinely glad. Because here's the thing about that quiet evening in Vancouver that I've come to understand only with distance. She wasn't leaving me. She was honest with both of us. She could see what I couldn't see from inside my own life. She could see that the shape we were holding was compressing something essential in both of us. And she said it. Plainly, without cruelty, without drama. She said it and trusted us both to do something with it. That took courage. More courage than I had given her credit for in the immediate aftermath. The nights when I had lain in the furnished apartment thinking about everything I had lost, I had not been thinking clearly enough about what she had actually done. She had forced both of us toward our actual lives. I don't know if I'll meet someone in Singapore. I don't know if that's in the next year or the next decade, or whether the form my personal life takes from here will be something I haven't imagined yet. What I know is that I'm no longer building my life around a waiting for it to begin. I'm in it. Every week is in it. Every meeting, every decision, every morning run, every dinner with Felix, and every call with Conrad, every moment of difficulty, and every moment of clarity. All of it counts. All of it is the actual life. Not the life before the real life. Not the warm-up. The real thing. There is a view from the roof terrace of my apartment building. I go up there sometimes in the early morning before the city gets loud. You can see the Marina Bay area from there. You can see the water. You can see the light changing as the sun comes up over the buildings. It is genuinely one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my ordinary daily life. And it is mine not because I was born to it. Not because it came to me, but because I made a decision. In a kitchen. In a temporary apartment. With a legal pad in front of me and a life I needed to stop waiting to live. The last message I got from a mutual connection in Vancouver was about 4 months ago. Someone who had worked in my industry there and had moved to Toronto. He sent me a message about a professional matter, and at the end of it he added something. He said, "You know, when you left, a lot of people in the scene here thought it was a midlife thing. Like you were running away. But watching what you've built over there, it's pretty clear it was the opposite." He said, "You ran towards something. Not everyone figures out the difference." I didn't respond to that part of the message. Not because it didn't mean something, but because some things don't need a response. Some things just need to be received. Quietly. Without performance. The way you receive a view from a rooftop early in the morning. The way you receive a word like proud from someone who watched you when you were standing still. The way you receive the slow, gradual understanding that the moment on the couch in Vancouver, The rain on the window, the quiet words of a woman who was honest when it would have been easier to stay quiet, was not the end of something. It was the beginning, just not in the way I was looking at the time. She said, maybe our story is meant to evolve into something different. And she was right. It was. Mine evolved into a leadership role in a city I had never imagined calling home. Into a version of myself I had been afraid to become. Into mornings that feel like mine. Into clarity. Into the actual life. And hers evolved into something she needed too. Something she had been waiting for as long as I had been waiting for mine. We just couldn't get there together. Some stories are like that. Not failures. Just chapters. Each one complete. Each one necessary. Each one pointing forward.